Tonight I want to talk to you about penile cancer. Penile cancer is one of these things that people that encourage circumcision are constantly trying to throw out there as a consequence of not being circumcised. Oh, if you don't get circumcised, you're going to get penile cancer, and it's so terrible and devastating and all this kind of thing. Well, now, penile cancer is extremely, extremely rare. In the entire United States, there's maybe a couple thousand cases a year at the most. And second, very interesting fact that completely throws their ideas out of the water is the fact that Europe's rate of penile cancer is either the same or less. So, look at it this way. In the United States, you have many guys who are circumcised, and you have X number of cases per year of penile cancer. In Europe, you have a very small percentage of guys who are circumcised, and the number of penile cancer cases are the same or less. Clearly, it's not the foreskin. The foreskin is not at fault. And I will repeat this again. Foreskin does not cause penile cancer. Smegma does not cause penile cancer. Whoever is saying this is lying to you. Either lying or they have no idea what they are talking about. You have various people out there who try to promote these ideas nonstop, and they are completely and totally wrong. They don't have a clue what they are talking about. I don't care what their credentials are, they are wrong. I have read many papers on the foreskin, circumcision, and things like that. And you know what was very fascinating that every single one of those had in common? They all tried to say that foreskin caused XYZ problems. But not one of them ever proved it. Not one paper ever demonstrated that. They always began with saying, of course, not being circumcised increases the chance of such and such problem. But they always started out by making that statement. Nowhere did they ever actually look at that statement. And nowhere did they actually have any sort of proof of that statement. And in fact, the evidence points otherwise. The numbers, of guys who are circumcised versus not circumcised in various countries, the rates of penile cancer being the same, this does not prove them right. In fact, it shows that it's completely unrelated to the foreskin at all. In fact, there was much more increased correlation when it showed that people that had, various STDs and things like that were at increased risk. And this was not the only risk, but increased risk for penile cancer were those that had a history of multiple STDs. So, that's a behavioral thing. Whether, how many people a guy chooses to sleep with, what sort of safety precautions he uses, all that kind of thing, that, is a behavioral thing. That is a choice that each guy makes, and that has nothing to do with the foreskin. So clearly it was how they act when it comes to sexual behavior had more to do with penile cancer than the foreskin. Another thing that they often said that I found extremely fascinating is it talked about cuts, abrasions, and trauma to the head of the penis and the foreskin was associated with increased risks of penile cancer. Well, guess what? What does abrasions and trauma and things like that to the penis sound like? That sounds like forced retraction to me. I would say, as a theory, of course, there's been no studies on it, but I would be very interested in wondering if a guy who is not circumcised happened to get penile cancer, I would be very interested in what his history was with regards to, was he forcibly retracted as an infant? Because forcing that foreskin back causes cuts and abrasions and trauma to the head of the penis and the inside of the foreskin. You're separating something, like pulling back a fingernail, when it should not be separated. And by doing this over and over and over again throughout childhood by caregivers who think they are keeping it clean, could very well have increased that risk. It's just a theory, but all of the papers mentioned those things. They never mentioned that it was from forced retraction, but what else would cause, all these cuts and abrasions on the penis on a regular basis? It would be this improper intact care. Because that is something that people do. And that would explain why the numbers are kind of the same. In that sense that it really doesn't have to do with circumcision at all. If anything, it would have to do with improper care. And yet, at the same time, guys who are circumcised also get penile cancer. So perhaps it's the trauma or the cuts or abrasions. Well, in guys who are circumcised, what are the cuts and abrasions and the trauma from the circumcision itself? So who knows? Both circumcised guys and guys who are forcibly retracted both suffer cuts and abrasions and trauma to their penis in childhood. And who knows if this increases the risk? And plus, all of these things only increase the risk. It's not a guaranteed by any means. But all of these lists of things I found very interesting that people had listed. They would list all these different things, and then they would say, and of course, not being circumcised. It's like, okay, you didn't really prove any of what you're saying here. You're just kind of saying like, well, and of course everybody knows, foreskin causes problems. It's like, no, foreskins don't cause problems. And so they're starting off by listing that with absolutely no proof, no studies or anything. They're just, and the numbers don't back it up. They're just automatically starting off their paper with a bias against the foreskin. So once again, having a foreskin does not cause penile cancer, and anyone who tells you otherwise is lying to you. And they are most likely trying to promote circumcision. And there's a lot of people with all kinds of credentials and degrees who are trying to do this. And some of them in good faith, others have it so ingrained in them that anything that is against the foreskin that they can latch onto, they'll latch onto and promote this bad-mouthing the intact penis nonstop. And to those people, I want to tell them, they don't know what they're talking about. A foreskin is awesome. Being uncircumcised is awesome. I wouldn't get circumcised for any reason in the world. And I keep saying that. And, people need to get that into their head. Having your foreskin is wonderful. And it's great. And people need to realize that these scare tactics are just that, scare tactics. Have a great day.